Welcome to Project Chatter, the podcast where PPM experts from various sectors talk about the latest trends. Listen to Val and Dale as they talk about tried and tested best practices and share their unfiltered thoughts about the industry. Whether you're here to learn how to progress your career, improve your project control skills, or just want to hear an Aussie and South African rant about projects, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Project Chatter podcast with your hosts, Dale Fung and Val Matthews.
In this episode, I speak to Rod Whiting. Rod is a semi-retired, highly experienced project controls professional with a deep passion for project controls as a discipline and for its effective application within organizations to deliver lasting benefits to society. He brings 41 years of experience working across multiple sectors, applying project controls as a critical enabler for the successful delivery of projects, programs, and portfolios. Throughout his career, he has actively contributed to the development and maturity of the profession. In recognition of this contribution, he was awarded the Global Project Controls Lifetime Achievement Award at the Project Controls Expo in 2022, followed by the Control and Skills Authority's Lifetime Contribution Award in 2025. So 2 Lifetime Contribution Awards for Rod. It was absolutely amazing to have Rod on the podcast. He has such pearls of wisdom. He's seen it all in his career, folks. This one is not just for project controls professionals, but for those that work on projects to understand the dark arts and how to get the best out of your project controls team, system, in whichever way you use project controls. And so you will really, really enjoy this one. You'll see Rod's focus is primarily on the people aspect, but in order to make it work, it needs an ecosystem. I'm not going to spoil it too much for you, so we'll leave it there. Keep listening, keep liking, and keep paying it forward. Hello, project people, and welcome back to another episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's amazing to be here, another episode in 2026. I have a fantastic guest on this episode, Mr. Rod Whiting. How are you doing, sir?
Pretty good. Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah, it's we've chatted quite a bit offline, Rod, at various conferences, events, and you're no stranger to the project controls profession. I think everyone knows a little bit about Rod, but for those globally that you may not have encountered, do you want to maybe start with your origin story? We probably don't have enough time for all the accolades you've achieved in your career, but perhaps some of the highlights. Where did it all start out for you? How did you get into project controls? And where did you end up?
Yeah, okay. So I actually started on the 1st of October 1983. So that was the start milestone. We're going to start with project controls straight away. And that was in the days, of course, when project controls wasn't called project controls. It didn't exist as a unified thing. And all these sort of things like planning and estimating were all sort of living in some kind of early form in various parts of the world in various industries. And so I started as a junior quantity surveyor, QS, went to a site measuring paintwork in thermal insulation, and then people started asking me, well, how much is it going to cost before we do it? And then what about the rest of the project costs? So I then got into the world of estimating, and then they started saying, how long is it going to take? So I then discovered this world of planning, and then things would go wrong. So I discovered the world of change management, and then they said, well, what about can we stop any of these things going wrong? So I then discovered risk management, and then realized with a lot of other folks at those kind of those days that these things actually all work together, and you need all of them. So I was sort of there on the journey through project controls, and as a practitioner, then into leading teams, and then finishing up as a director for project controls, and really, really wanted to be part of the community as well. So not just working, but there with the profession. And a couple of years ago, I got the Global Lifetime Achievement Award at the Project Controls Global Expo in London. So that's the sort of highlight of all of that work, but probably more sort of giving back into the community where it led me. Yeah.
Wow, absolutely amazing. So there's not much that you haven't seen in the world of project controls, Rod. So I'm sure we can explore all avenues. You've no doubt seen the evolution as you briefly describing there, of the profession. And I'm sure there's many things you look back and you go, well, I've seen that before, and it's, we're just making the same old mistakes. But I'm sure there's plenty you've seen in terms of how we've evolved with different techniques, methodologies, tools, technology as well. And a big part, I think, of our profession that we realized is that there's a lot of human aspects to what we do as well. Storytelling, the art of communication, stakeholder management, all those various aspects. But let's start sort of at the macro level, because you've put on the table an interesting topic. You've put on the importance of a project control friendly culture. So we'll try and pick that apart and, what is a project control friendly culture? But I think for the listeners as well, it'd be amazing if you can sort of add in little anecdotes here and there of your career, because I wouldn't want those stories to go untold, having the opportunity to talk to you and share that with the world. But where do you want to start with this topic? What is a project control friendly culture?
Yeah, so this is something that I've kind of experienced friendly and non-friendly cultures right the way through. And it's been something that's been like the make or break for successful project controls. So what I mean is, there's the people, there's these great systems that we have now that have developed, but it's around how it's received and how it's used that's the make or break. And so what it means is it's project controls, is it understood by everybody, and do people value it for what it is? When you get that right through the organization, that's when a project controls is at its maximum benefit. Where that's not in place, that's when it goes wrong, or it never gets to the potential that it can get at. So, that is from stories. I can say, there's some of these companies that we've gone in, they've, it's usually because they've had something go wrong with a project and they realize that they need project controls. So you'll go in, and some of the companies who get it, you get brought in by a senior member of the board, kind of explain, sort of reinforce what project controls can do for them, and they go, yeah, that's great, and they support you to get the organization behind you and make sure it embeds. But then you get the other companies that I've been in as well, where you're going in and maybe it's like a mid-manager's idea to bring you in, and you haven't got that support of the execs, and they're not really interested. They don't get it. They just see it's another cost, and it all just kind of falls apart and never gets to where it is. So that culture's key. Yeah.
It's amazing because it's the age-old struggle. We often get asked this question: is how do you showcase the value of project controls? And you gave sort of two key ingredients there. People understand it and they value it. And it's almost like one of those things, right, where those that know, whereas a lot of the times decision makers, budget holders are trying to look for a return on investment.
Yeah.
Unless you have the magic formula, or you can tell us, everyone that's listening, this is exactly how you work it out. I've personally struggled to go, this is the pound return on investment that you will get, because it's in many instances, it's not a direct saving or benefit that you can measure in real time. Oftentimes, and Val and I have spoken about this before on other podcasts, where if you had the ability to simulate exactly the same situation, just the only difference is with a project controls team and one without, you could probably then measure the difference. But we know we don't have the luxury of that because we have to deliver the project. So how do you go about demonstrating or convincing people that project control has value?
So I've kind of got two ways of doing it. One's a bit of a joke, and one is sort of more practical. But I actually mention both of them when I'm speaking to like say the senior leaders or anyone who doesn't get it. The first way is, well, I'll just break into your car and I'll take your dashboard out of your car, and then let me know you're going to get on after a month. Or you could go on a plane and I'll give you there's two prices. You can have the £500 ticket, which you've got your pilot and he's got a co-pilot and they've got lots of all these lovely instruments. Or you can have one, I don't know, we don't know how much it's going to cost. Say it's going to save you £5, but you've got no co-pilot, no navigator and no instruments. Which plane you're going to get on? And then they suddenly realize, well, I want the one that's got all that. And they go, why do you want that? Well, otherwise I'm not going to know whether it's safe. I'm not going to know when I'm going to get there. So actually, they realize that they know the answer themselves. It's a bit of a sort of Socratic method of doing it. So that's kind of my jokey one of doing it. But in that same sort of session, normally practically what I do is I have a bunch of envelopes with different roles within the project group. One of them be a contractor, and there'll be certain information in there. Someone will be the planner, there'll be certain information in there. And I just give the people a scenario and say, right, you're that person, you're that person, you're that person, but you're the person in charge. Tell me how much this project's going to cost and how long is it going to take? Well, I don't know. Well, ask this person. And then they realize that that's why they need it. But of course, the true cost or the benefit is if you don't do that, it's the cost of failure. So the value is not spending that extra money, and it's not that extra delay. That's the way I do it, rather than try and flip it to say it's going to save you this, that, or the other. So
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think what comes into play there, listening to you, is also that art of stakeholder management, expectation management, but also just making it relatable to others. Oftentimes we go in and we go, oh well, if you do risk management and you do QSRs and you get all technical, right, and you lose people straight away, because who knows what a distribution curve actually does, right? What does a PAT actually mean? So I think that's often where we make mistakes as project controls professionals. We get too technical too early, and we lose the stakeholders very, very early on.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, just to add to that, the quick wins is quite an interesting strategy as well that I've seen used and have used, where we know that if you have no project controls team or department, there's no magic wand that all of a sudden it all works, because there's processes, there's tools, there's a whole ecosystem of project controls that needs to be set up. And also those around the project control system need to understand, as you say, how it works and why it's there. I think along the way, though, there's probably some quick wins that we can do, especially with the technology we have today. But even prior to technology, I saw some really fantastic project controls professionals demonstrate quick wins, quick value, where if you worth your salt, you can pick up a project schedule from, cold, assess it, take a couple of hours and identify where the pinch points might be without any fancy tools and techniques. And that's demonstrating, immediate value. So I just wonder if there's any other sort of, just those listening in, right? We've got Rod Whiting on the call, Global Lifetime Achievement Award winner. What are some of the tips you can share, the pearls of wisdom to those listening in?
So understanding the project and what it's there to do is important, and understanding the people that you're working with. So what style of communication they like. So I've discovered some people love a graph and a picture, and usually that's the more senior you are, the more necessary pictures are. And some people love tables of numbers. So understanding, how their brain receives information is really important, and knowing the sort of questions that they're likely to ask. What are the important things that they need to know to make decisions? So nice and concise. You don't produce massive reports that you expect people to just read to discover the information. Those are mistakes that I've made in the past. Well, it was in a report, why didn't you read it? It's very much presenting information and say, look, here's all the data, but this is what you need to know. This is where things are going off track. This is what you need to look at, and these are decisions to make. So just helping them to make the decisions, so they're not searching for information. You kind of, it's a bit like that co-pilot. You know enough about what their job is that you know the information that they need, and like you say, getting those quick wins in, things that they've never had before. So one of the places I went, they never were able to see their capital spend across their portfolio over a year, month by month. And we were able to get that up and running very, very quickly within a couple of months. And they were absolutely amazed. It's the first time we've ever been able to see this and ever. And they were really, really pleased. And like you say, the quality of information you can get. One of the first places I worked, I really got a good understanding of their sort of costs. So their projects overall in the portfolio, I managed to get in with plus or minus 1% every year. Well, but one in 20 projects had to go back for extra money, but I got within a very, very close tolerance because I had an excellent cost base, and therefore that site got all the investment because they knew that when they went for a project sanction, they knew the value was correct and they knew we were going to deliver it. So it built that trust. So all those kind of stories stick. And and having that sort of information and those knowledge bank success stories is really important if you're trying to promote and give that assurance that it's it's a positive thing for your projects.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned there, you've made mistakes. I think we all have, which is great. And I want to ask you, often we don't learn when things go well, especially if people tell you this is how you should do it, right? But when you make a mistake and it's a big, excuse my French, fuck up, you go, I'm not going to do that again, right?
Yeah.
Are there any sort of those types of stories that you got in your war chest worth sharing where this happened and this is how we recovered it and this was the result of it? Because I think those will stick with the listeners to go, don't do that.
Yeah. Yes. So so many mistakes, unfortunately, but that's what happens when you're sort of there evolving with everything. I think going and assuming you know everything without finding out is a good general one. I've assumed a team that I'd gone in all knew each other, and I was just coming in as the new lead, and they knew everything about the business and all the projects and everything else, and I never bothered to find out. And actually, they'd only just formed and been put together a few months before, so that team wasn't as cohesive as it was, and I was wondering why people weren't talking to each other and this kind of thing. So I thought, right, well, that's one thing I need to know next time I go in somewhere. Understand the team. Do they know each other? And if not, let's get those relationships going, because it's in the relationships that people then talk to each other. Doing that sort of team building stuff, which all can seem a bit corny, but if you get to know each other, outside of work, then you tend to work well with each other if you trust each other. I mean, that's another one, not so much a mistake I've made, but mistakes I've seen other people make are those bosses that nobody likes. They think they're, the big hard man, and they go in and everybody hates them. And then nobody's there to help them out. When they make a mistake, people just let them hang themselves. So that's a mistake I've seen other people make that I've, fortunately, that's not my character type for sure. But I think, don't don't think that's the way to manage projects. You're just setting yourself up. Anything that relies on teams, which everything does really, doesn't it? Is a disaster. And like I said, don't keep bad news or what perceived as bad news back. If you can see something you think's going wrong, don't think, oh, I'll leave it a month and see if it's back on track. Just say it in the right way. I think this is going off. You don't need to be pointing fingers and accusing people, but just don't keep bad news thinking it's going to go away, because usually it just gets worse and worse. And someone told me a story once. So it wasn't a project that I worked on, but it was a site somewhere in the UK where over a number of years they just did rubbish project controls. So they just made up numbers for each project, and the next project would then fund the overspend on the previous project. So illegal as well as rubbish. Yeah. So every year they had a capital plan, and they just kept this going and going and going until the company just said, we're not having any more capital projects next year. Okay, £90 million overspend of existing projects that had to be found. So what ended up happening is the entire management of that site got sacked, and obviously the companies that were providing the so-called project controls had never set foot on that again. So again, fortunately not one I've made, but like you say, one where I've heard these stories, and I thought that just reinforces what we're there to do is to be the bearers of the news, and the only bad news is late news, isn't it? That's the story. So those are a few of the ones that always pop into mind as the real howlers. Yeah, other small ones are just don't use green, red, and amber on on your traffic lights, because that doesn't help colorblind people. Do something else. Visual management, that's always a good one as well. That you can fall foul of that one. Yeah.
Yeah, no, some fantastic stories there. And it's interesting just listening to some of those anecdotes. I'm sure listeners will think of their own stories and their own situations and go, yep, that sounds familiar. I've seen that before. You hear the stories of, projects just rebaselining every time, they get delayed or they, overspending and just masking everything all of the time. And it's a very, very important role, because we actually are the sort of the first gatekeepers, protecting the organization from failure. And I mean the organization, I don't just mean the project, because if your project is critical enough, or it could be, a death by a thousand cuts if there's enough smaller projects, you could sink the company. And so it's a really, really critical role. A lot of times I think both us as professional, as well as some stakeholders view project controls as purely a reporting function. But if that's the case, then we've got it wrong. We've done something that we haven't done it justice, and we need to do a bit more work to elevate the value, as we keep talking about, of project controls. The other thing that you got talking about there sort of in the beginning was around the team and identifying the relationships and how they work and what motivates them. And I'd love for you to share some of your tips and techniques of how to do that, because it doesn't work for everyone. I've tried different things. I've tried things, when I inherit a new team, because typically when you're a leader, especially in a large organization or moving on to a project, you inherit the team, as you say. You don't often get the luxury, should we call it, of selecting your own team, because if you did, a lot of the times you would select people you've already worked with, and you know how they work, they know how you work, and you've got those synergies already. But to establish brand new relationships while the project is in flight is sometimes a tricky task. And I've done everything from what I call speed dating. So taking individuals out for a coffee, asking them what's important to them, getting to know them, telling them what's important to me, just figuring out what they're like as human beings. And the other one, which I used after hearing it, a lot of the things we do is we hear good things and we try and repeat it in our own ways, was when you go into a new team and, the first thing you say to people that you're going to be working with, if you want their backing, is, hey, listen, I need you to have my back because I've got yours. And when you tell people I've got your back and you start with trust in the beginning, it's a really, really great foundation to build a relationship on. So yeah, just some of the tips, perhaps some of the things you've used in building teams.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, one of them is just my sort of style generally, which is, I think it's like called servant leaders, which is, I've always had that. If people know and they can see that you're not going in, like I say, just to big yourself up, but your job is to help them do their job as best as it can. So I always tell them that, but then I make sure that I demonstrate that as well. So, and that's you've got to start with it, and you've got to be very consistent with it and keep it going. The other thing is genuinely caring about people. People are very good at seeing whether someone genuinely says that or whether they're just giving them some kind of line they've heard on a management course. So spending time one-to-one with people is important. So I do that, whether it's sort of one-to-ones every week or every fortnight, depending what it is, and chatting about not just the work situation, how are they doing? Because, most people now are realizing that our kind of work life isn't just a little bubble that exists on its own. It's there to do with their family life, their own personal life, what's going on in their minds and all these kind of situations, how well they're feeling. So, I talk to people just as people. And then out of that, obviously we talk about work as well and the things that they're struggling about. And I found that gives that openness and that trust that you then, just continue to build and reinforce over the years and months that you're with people. And that's really where it's really well with the individuals. And then, like I say, just trying to get people together as teams, making sure it's not too much because people have got jobs to do. That's the difficult balance, isn't it? But the one-to-one stuff, I think I'm better at that. And the teams thing is, like I say, the thing that you really do need some of these sort of techniques. But getting people out doing things, some of the things that I've always enjoyed and I've seen worked best is you can go out and do a charity event, just, with a day. So a day out doing some charity stuff with people, whether it's, digging holes, cleaning up litter, doing some demolition work, working in a food bank together. I think that builds a team better than, a kind of a corporate designed team building event, doing something real, something matters where you're just chit chatting as well and getting to know each other. That's been the most successful for me.
Yes, and it's that human touch, right? That, as you say, as human beings, we are highly tuned in. We're highly tuned in terms of how others actually are behaving behind the veneer that they might have. I just wonder, though, as we sort of dip our toe into technology without bringing the two letters that everyone's talking about, or maybe we'll leave that till the end. But just in terms of the COVID landscape and how that, technology then impacted the way we work and how much potentially more difficult it is to build teams remotely, how important that face-to-face time actually then becomes, because you don't have as much of it. I mean, I was chatting the other day, and you'll probably remember these things fondly, Rod. Every weekend, we were down at the pub on the Friday after work, and it wasn't a company organized thing. It was there because you wanted to socialize with the people you worked with. You enjoyed each other's company. You became lifelong friends. You started doing events or trips together. And it was more than just you go to the office to catch up from a work perspective, where I feel like, we've lost that quite significantly. What's your view on that? Are there ways to sort of make up for those gaps? Or do you see this is the way that we work now and we need to just find new ways and pick up new skills in order to deal with it?
Yeah, it's kind of probably a bit of both because, like I say, I remember the days of playing cricket in the evening with an office against another office, or darts and stuff like that, just because that's what you did, and it was all good fun. But I mean, technology kind of saved work, really, didn't it, during COVID? If we didn't have, Teams and that connectivity that we've got now, we would have all been in a lot worse state, the country with all companies and us as individuals. So, it was great. And it has changed the workplace, that is for sure. Will it be forever? I think, it's difficult to know, isn't it? These things evolve. And one thing we know for sure is you don't know something for sure. COVID's an example of that. So that's one thing to always bear in mind as well, that you can't know for sure exactly what's going to happen. And I think trying to force things into a shape maybe of the past is always a dangerous thing as well. I think, we've learned things through COVID. I mean, one of them, the big question was working from home work at all. So it was always working from home. The bosses that often work from home on a Friday, and we all knew what that meant. He was off at the golf course, or she was at the pub, or whatever they were doing. Whereas now, actually, the big experiment is, do you know what? That actually did work. And for some companies and some industries, we're actually more efficient because people still logged on at the same time as they would have got in the car, and they logged off, when they got through the door and all this kind of stuff. So I think it's been a good thing. But it's got to swing back as well, because we can't just exist. Um, the little boxes that we've got. They're great, but you can't continue like that all the time. So, there are people that joined companies during COVID and never saw anyone in person for, that couple of years when you weren't allowed out. So the key bit is, like I say, getting that balance right, getting people back in and having those times together. One mistake that I've seen a lot of is, okay, you're back in the office, say a day a week, but then everyone comes in and they just sit in front of laptops and they're on their headphones. That's like, well, what's the point of that? Why have I come in? So I think being intentional on those days when you're getting people in, that's when you organise your team meetings. Let's all get together, let's get the pizzas in or whatever. Let have a drink at the pub after, for those that can. Whatever you're going to do, be a bit intentional about those days. Let's make sure that those are the 2 or 3 days, that balance kind of piece, that we're doing that in-person stuff rather than just coming in an office and sitting in front of the screen like we do at home.
Yeah, very, very wise words there. And I think it's easier said than done, but that intention, if you actually book it out, not to have a virtual meeting, but book the time out, whether it's whatever you can afford, if it's an hour, 2 hours, half a day, a full day, whatever you can afford, just to have that face-to-face time, those conversations, whether it's playing board games or going for a walk together. Doing something communal, I think, works quite well as well. An activity, whether it's going out together, and it doesn't have to be this, but whether it's picking up rubbish along the streets, or, some community service type thing, going to support a charity, whatever it is, I find those types of things. And as you say, doing sports together. You mentioned cricket there, playing against other companies. I remember there, companies at five-a-side football. We entered together. We entered duathlons in Richmond Park in London and things like that. The Three Peaks Challenge is always a good one for companies to do in the UK. So there's all sorts of physical things you can do that bring you closer as people and as teams. I saw an interesting article just yesterday, actually, Rod. I wonder what your take is on this. I saw an article where Elon Musk We got to mention him because he's got some South African roots. But whether you like him or hate him, some of the things he does and says have a big impact on the world. He was saying that in his view, his prediction in between 10 and 20 years from now, work will be optional based on the trajectory of technology, and that it would be like gardening or growing your own vegetables. If you liked growing your own vegetables, you'd put the work in to grow them so you could eat them. But if you didn't, you'd go to the supermarket and buy it. And that's what work will become. What are your thoughts on that? I see you smiling and laughing.
Yeah. I think it's because I think I've heard that story before. I think I remember in the 70s watching a program called Tomorrow's World, saying that we'd all have robots by now and we wouldn't be working. And prior to that, it was, oh, we're computers, we won't be working. And but before my time, I think there was like in the 1950s, they were saying that, we won't be working in 20 years' time. So I think we will be. And as our work is different now to it was then, it will be different, but we will be working. And actually, I think we need to work as people. Um, Certainly, even though I've kind of retired in a sense, I've not stopped. So I'm going to call myself sort of a semi-retired or a fake retiree, I think. But I think we're designed to work. We need to. So I think it's good for us as well as us. And that's what's needed. So I don't think we won't be all sat around. I think we'd all go stir crazy, especially if the daytime TV is anything like I've caught glimpses of.
Yeah, well, you're very fortunate. I mean, I don't know what any TV looks like these days, but I guess that's just the sign of the times. Not complaining, but yeah, TV is very much a luxury. The other thing that I wanted to explore with you was around you mentioned some of you talk about project controls friendly culture, but you also mentioned unfriendly or not friendly culture, and my mind got thinking around whose job is it to create that culture, that environment. If you're listening to this as whether you're a project controller, project manager, a project director, a leader of an organization, an MD, whose job is it to create a project controls friendly culture?
So I'm going to say it's everyone's job, but everyone's job's slightly different. So I would say the most important in terms of culture are going to be the leaders, because that generally is where culture comes from, I would say. They set that. So if you give and this is what I've seen, a project manager has worked sort of for 30 years for a company, knows someone on the exec suite, and it's like, oh, I don't need to do any of that. And they give him a buy, he doesn't need to do it. He can carry on doing it his own way. You're just letting it off for everyone else as well, so it's the senior leaders have got to say, this is what we're doing, get them to explain. So it's that thing, before you do it, get them to say, this is the change that we're doing. We're bringing in project controls. This is why we're doing it. You're going to see that doing it. Then get everybody involved to make them realize that it's not a threat to them, that it needs them and they're needed and they will benefit from it. So, get with the program, and get them to realize that it's not a threat to their individual job and role is super important. The PMs, I always say there's two sorts of project managers. There's the good ones. They go, where's my project controls team? Because they know it is. And then the bad ones go, I don't need any of that. And then right, okay, they're just going to blag it, aren't they? They're just going to tell a load of stories and then just go out all guns blazing and try and bully their way through the project, which is a way of doing it, but not. I don't want to be part of that. And
No,
most
absolutely.
people don't enjoy doing that. Yeah, there's the project managers, and again the project directors. They've got to say, look, this is the governance that as a company we've got in place. So I know what it is. I know what it's important. We're going to get it, and you'll always get the early adopters. So one of the places I worked at had 8 different locations that previously they were all allowed to do their own thing. So it wasn't necessarily they were doing their own thing wrong, although some of them were, but it was just get them involved and say, look, I'm not saying anything you've done is wrong, but we've got to do it consistently. We've got to do it the same way so that the data is usable across the company and that we're all doing it the same way. So if we move people around, you haven't got to learn a new way and all these kind of things. So it's a hearts and mind thing. And that say some 2 sites were straight on board because they were keen on the profession and want to do it. There was then 4 sites that kind of went along with it because that's what I've been told and, followed it. And there were 2 sites that, they were the resistors. But in the end, one started doing it and the other one didn't want to be the last one. So they got there in the end, even though it was reluctantly, but you needed to sort of keep on top of them a little bit more to make sure they didn't slide back into the bad habits. Yeah.
Well, that's an important lesson as well, I think, is we can't apply the same approach to every individual in the team because everyone reacts slightly differently. So it's also something to be aware of. Although the team might have a certain culture or way of working, individuals have slightly different ways of operating themselves as well. But as you're talking there, it's hasn't sort of gone amiss on me that you probably had some pretty decent leaders and managers in your time that parted, pearls of wisdom onto you. And are there any specific things that you remember along your journey in your career that when you were told this or you saw that stuck with you that you can share?
Yeah, I think was sort of one of the more recent ones when I first started. He just said, look, for the first 3 months, I don't expect you to do anything. Just go and find out about the business. He wanted to invest some time into people. So you're not saying, right, next week I want you to start performing at 100 miles an hour. It just gave me that time to get to know people and the systems and the business. That was really valuable. And I did appreciate that. And the other thing is he then backed me and backed project controls for months and months and months in an organization that it obviously were a bit resistant to it. So obviously he realized that this was what they needed. So he was super supportive in every single meeting. I would then, start, let's say, giving these insights and he would go, and that's why we need project controls. Almost as a little catchphrase, he would say, and that's why we need a project controls. Has anyone got any questions again? So that was really, really good. I really enjoyed that and it made a big difference, except for when he left. And then that it can swing back. So like I said, that's why that leadership and that culture is so important. You've got to be maintained. If it goes, then it can all change. And that's the trouble, organizations, quite rightly, leaders do come and go. And part of the process, I think, bringing in other leaders is to sort of see how they fit with what's happening and make sure they're not signed kind of like rogues, as it were. Not rogues in like criminal sense, but just want to go off in some crazy parallel universe that the rest of the world's not living in.
Yeah, you're right. And I think, we've all worked with those exceptional people and they don't necessarily have to have been leaders or managers for us, but sometimes they're just a team member. And you're right, when they go, everyone feels it, right? You go, shit, there's a massive gap there. So, hang on and learn from those folks when you have them around, because we don't have enough of them, I don't think. But anyway, just moving on slightly a little bit as well. One of the other things that I'd like to explore with you is, your illustrious career. You've seen and done it all. What are some of the mistakes that you see us constantly repeating over and over? You look back and you go, guys, just stop doing this. We fixed this already, yet we keep doing this over and over. Is there anything from your perspective, your bird's eye view, that you can go, that shouldn't happen anymore?
Yeah, there's a bunch really. I guess if I think about people, just making sure that you're hiring the right characters. So not just someone who can operate a bit of software. It's around attitude and character. That's the most important bit. So obviously they need a certain level of technical competence, but always go for those people that are proactive, positive people. That's for sure. Which way did you phrase the question, Dale, again? Mistakes
Yeah,
or the good things?
either
Mistakes.
way, I think, because, perhaps some of the good things that we are repeating
Yeah,
need to be put in the spotlight.
yeah,
And some of the things that repeat offenders should actually be just put to bed.
yeah. Rushing in with technology is a mistake. If you go in without sort of thinking what you want to do with it, I've seen companies do that. They buy something because someone's sold them is this is your answer to everything, and they've not then involved project control, say, in that discussion or even in the setup. And it's like, well, you've missed this, that, and the other, and it just won't work. And then for some strange reason, it's project control's fault, not the person who's implemented it. That's been a howler. But I think the biggest one is what we call the lessons learned process, which isn't a lessons learned process. In most places, I've seen it write it down on a piece of paper or on a spreadsheet and then leave it in a drawer in a file, never to see the light again. So the learning of lessons learned is been
Like a
universally.
funeral, isn't it? Like
It's rubbish. It's I've not seen it done perfectly anywhere. I've read how it's supposed to be done and I've tried to, implement it and people go, oh yeah, that's a good idea. So actually what's the lesson? Finding it out straight away and then getting it embedded back into the processes straight away. Someone owns it and you see it through till it's out. So, that's some of the things I've sort of picked up is one of the worst things that every company is just absolutely rubbish at is lessons learned. So yeah, keeping it
just
as a
pausing on,
proper log.
sorry
Yes.
to jump in there,
Yeah.
interrupt you. Just pausing on that bit, and it's something we explored a little bit with Joe Lucas in last season around how we potentially have this, exodus of experience retiring, like yourself, but we haven't, as a profession, fully captured that experience and passed it on. Folks like yourself would have done it in your own right with the people you've worked with, succession planning, and passed on the knowledge. You're on the Project Chatter podcast, sharing your pearls of wisdom. But there's probably a plethora of folk out there with such experience, and they take it with them as they go. And I just wonder, in terms of lessons learned through that lens, how we might be able to be better at transferring knowledge and experience onto the next sort of generations coming through.
Yeah. I think some of the recent publications have probably helped with that. Where, as the new British Standard, I sort of commented and fed into that as a little bunch of people do. The people that have put together the project controls in the 21st century, a lot of the people that have been around a long time. They've put a lot of that knowledge into it, and Shane Forth's book, and prior to that, that experience being captured because they're not sort of super just sort of technical books. They've got a lot of that kind of experience built into them. So, I would say those recent resources are really important. And again, the professional bodies, again, are very good at trying to capture those lessons, things like this, webinars, events, where you're trying to get it into the corporate professional mindset, and experience so people are learning rather than making the same mistakes themselves are really important. And, the fact that these are recorded and they're there forever, so that, people can look them up, um, is a massive, massive help and something that just didn't exist before. Like you say, someone retired, left the company, and they were never seen again. And all that knowledge is gone. So I think, you can't download your entire brain, unfortunately. And it's in conversations that you go,
Yet,
yeah, you go, oh, no, I've got a story about that. Doesn't usually I've got a story about everything really, but you don't think of it all. But there's a lot of stuff that is captured. And I think in those times when people come together, that's when they go, oh yeah, that was I've had that, I've had that. It's a really important one. Let's capture that and make sure that's shared. Expo, the CASA conferences, they're great as well for, a better knowledge foundation from where I started. Basically there wasn't anything. We've had to develop it. Where folks now, the lecturers that do the project controls apprenticeship, the lecturers are generally people who've been in the game for quite a long time, so they're able to feed in some of their experience into those lessons as well as this is how you work a critical path out, for instance, as you say, yeah, where you do a 3-point estimate and this kind of stuff. Some of the stories behind it help as well. Yeah.
yeah, no, excellent. Look, one of the things that I think is probably worth doing with you as well is having a stab at where we think project controls is going, because we've heard it, well, I've heard it in relatively short career compared to you, is, I heard it a couple of years ago. Oh, project controls is dead. Data analytics is the new project controls. And look, well, hang on, project controls always analyze data. We just have technology that's improved now. That's not any different, and that soon died a death. Data analytics hasn't overtaken project controls; it's added to, what we've always done. And then, the past couple of years, the two letters we've been trying not to mention on this episode, AI, has been in the spotlight as well, and how that might impact not just controls, but the profession, the project profession at large, and also other roles in organizations. But because we're talking about project controls, let's focus there. I like to see the technology, and I call it technology rather than just focusing on AI, because other technology exists as well and is developing. I like to see technology as a partner in terms of what we do. And the advantage is to understand it, not to let it do your work for you. That's my view on it. However, I've obviously spoken to many different people in terms of where they see the technology taking the profession and how that might change the role of the project controller or the disciplines within project controls. How do you see technology impacting what we do, whether you're a project planner, risk manager, project controls professional, etc.?
Yeah. So I think what it'd do is it'd take some of the manual processes and activities out for us. So, maybe giving a first stab at a schedule, finding that rate library, for instance, and putting things together, measuring drawings, all this kind of thing, the stuff that's sort of quite labor intensive. I think that's where the technology is going to help. So that's one way. So to do a lot of that laborious stuff. I think the other one, which is probably a little bit more exciting, is it'd be able to look at things that we just didn't have the time to do. And I mean it physically, you wouldn't have the time to do it. So for instance, you might want it to look at all your schedules every sort of month or something and just tell me a story. What's happening in my schedule? How is it? What's going on? Right, you're always over optimistic on everything, so why you start thinking, right, okay, what are we going to do different? So it can look at all those kind of things that would just be too many numbers to crunch. So that's another thing. So we'll get some more information. And I think also the timeliness of information is something that technology would do as well. So this is again, if I go back to the car analogy, it's no good at the minute. We're driving cars that telling us how much petrol we had last month, aren't we? With our reporting, it's month end business. Whereas obviously I want to know how much petrol I've got now. I want to know how much speed I am now, and I know on the map where I am now, and things like that. And I think, the technology is going to enable us to shorten that window. I mean, ideally, you'd like it so it was almost instantaneous, and you can kind of see glimmers of that with, the ability to process a picture and for that to be translated into data and update, progress on a schedule and, what cost would that be and all this kind of stuff. So you can see that gap coming, which is going to give more and more to-date info, which again enables quicker decision makings. So I think that's one area as well. And I think all of that for the project controller just means that we can use our experience and insights a bit more to sort of see what this information looks like and to give more and more insights about, okay, well, I think this is something that's worth looking at whilst the rest of the project team are concentrating on, going down the path that we've already decided. We can look at the landscape a little bit more and find out what's going on. So yeah, those are the kind of things that I can see.
And dare I say it, if we continue with a car analogy and we're heading towards driverless cars, what does that mean for us? But perhaps we don't go there on this episode, because I want to make a bit of space as well for some of perhaps the highs and the lows of your career that we haven't yet dipped our toe into, because I think we've given the listeners a decent level of what the culture, a friendly culture, looks like and what it doesn't look like. Some of the tips you've shared, some amazing tips on how to build teams and build relationships and what to look out for, some of the things we shouldn't be doing. What are some of those stories that have never been told before, Rod, that perhaps this is your opportunity to share and go, hey, you know what? This is something that I need to tell everyone.
I think the highs for me are when I see people that I've kind of brought into a company soar. I've seen them where they were before doing okay, but I could see the potential that they've got because of their characters. I know they've got the intellectual capability to do more and they just need that opportunity. So, the people that I've seen just blossom and shoot up, that's it for me. That's always my number one thing.
Do you want to name any names? Perhaps we can get them on the podcast as well. Give them some kudos.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if I want to drop them in it, really. I wouldn't want to necessarily, but I'd have to speak to them before.
I'll get them for you from you offline,
Yeah,
and then we
yeah,
can
yeah.
hassle them.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. But that's always my number one highlight, just to see people really, 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 really go for it. And then I suppose on the lows, I think the worst thing I have to do is letting people go. That's always the hardest thing, in those, because obviously I've been through a few recessions and stuff like that. That's the hardest thing. And I think doing that well is really difficult. So I think being as compassionate as possible when you have to make difficult business decisions. So they are low for me for sure, but you have to do them unfortunately at times. But do it well, be as compassionate as possible in that process. So you can see I'm kind of like people orientated, very much. I think, but if I move outside of that, the highlights are when I see a project succeed and the benefits come out of it. So like pharmaceuticals, when you see a new product that they want to do it, the project's been done on time, and those medicines are going out to people and improving their life. So that's something that I've always been really, really proud about, being part of that team to do that. Yeah, that those have been great as well.
Yeah, no, those are some awesome ones. And similar to you, I, have a very people focused view on what, good looks like. It's not always easy to do, as you say. There's tough times as well, tough decisions you have to make. I think, as long as you make those tough decisions with dignity, allow everyone to, hold their heads up high. But also on your point around project delivery, I don't think anyone goes into projects to do a bad job. There may be one or two here and there, but there are very few that go in to be sinister and malicious. Most people want to go in and do a good job. Whether they want to go over, beyond, and above, that's up to them. But most people, even if they're just doing their 9 to 5, they want to go in, they want to, give the best account of themselves. That's all you can really ask for at the end of the day. All the projects that we generally work on are actually projects that deliver outcomes for people, for the public, for you and I, for our loved ones, etc. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that when we're working on a project. And whether you working, with a water company, or whether you're a rail company or a nuclear company, or whatever, you're building schools or hospitals, whatever it might be, there's an outcome that impacts people at the end of it. And I think it's important to remind ourselves about that. And I love the fact that, you are people focused, because ultimately, as we say, we work with people and we work for people. Yeah, very, very wise and I think interesting lessons that everyone can take. Sorry, jump in there
I
if
was
you
going to
want.
say it's something I always mention that everywhere I work is, in the tough times and the boring times when you're just looking at a spreadsheet and trying to get it add up. It's just look at that big picture. You're there. If it's a nuclear power station, you're going to be providing energy. If it's the oil and gas industry, you're keeping the cars going while we figure out how else we want to do it. If it's like say pharmaceuticals, you're improving people's lives. Always remember what you're doing is benefiting society, so look at the big picture. I think there's that old story about, I can't remember who it was or where it was, but it was a long time ago. Someone asked one guy who was putting one brick on top of another, and he said, "What are you doing?" "I'm just putting this block on top of this one, and I put that one on top of the other one." And he asked the other guy next to him, "What are you doing?" "I'm building a cathedral." It's that making sure that everyone always knows the purpose of what you're doing and the benefits of it is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Rod, an hour has gone by very, very quickly. I'd love to have you back. I'm sure there's plenty more stories in that war chest of yours that you've collected over the years. And thank you so much for coming on. I know I've been bugging you for a while now. Come on. I'd love you to share what you've done in your career. But I thank you so much for coming on. But before we let you go, any final thoughts that you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the one thing I would like to say, when I've sort of moved on from companies, is be kind to each other. That's it. Like you say, we're people. We work with people, and what we do is for the benefit of people. And be kind and be compassionate to each other, and like I say, serve people. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, amazing. Your words are far better than mine as a South African. It's a bit more rough and ready. Just don't be a dick. But we'll cater for all audiences. So whichever one works for you, folks. Either be kind or don't be a
Yeah,
dick.
they're the
Use
two
either
ends,
one.
the two ends of the spectrum, aren't they? There's
Exactly.
two alternatives. Don't be that, be this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Project Chatter is here to provide you with perspective. But look, as I said, Rod, it's been an absolute privilege and pleasure to have you on the podcast. It's been a long time coming. We'd love to have you back. I'd love to get those names from you once we stop hitting record as well, so I can, you can stitch up your colleagues and your friends. But yeah, thank you so much once again for coming on the Project Chatter podcast. It's been amazing to have you with us.
Anytime, it's a pleasure.
So folks, there you have it. That is the end of this episode. But if you like what you've heard, please do help us and pay it forward. Share a link to this episode on your favorite social media. Once again, a massive thank you to our guest, Rod Whiting, and thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From all of us, it's bye for now.